Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. William Song from Omni Aesthetics. And first of all, I wanted to wish everybody a very happy Thanksgiving. It's been a crazy year for all of us. And with the coronavirus still circulating and the numbers going up and Thanksgiving coming, I wanted to speak to you about that, about Thanksgiving and about getting together with our families. I know that some of us will not be celebrating Thanksgiving in the usual way with our loved ones, and some of us will be celebrating a much more toned down Thanksgiving. And I know some of you are going to be having a big Thanksgiving bash anyway. And so I've been getting a lot of questions from my patients and my friends about what they can do about Thanksgiving. Okay, so I think the best way to go about this is to just tell you about some of the cases, some of the things that I've been asked this week. One friend of mine just went on a trip with some buddies and just got back and wants to spend Thanksgiving with his family, but his wife is not allowing him to join them at the Thanksgiving dinner because he has to quarantine. So he called me up asking me if I could do a coronavirus test for him so that he can be cleared to go and enjoy Thanksgiving with his family instead of spending it in the guest room. So my answer to that is we can do a test, but it's probably too soon. Okay, so if you were exposed today and you do a test, the test is probably going to come back negative because the virus, if you do a nasal swab, which is typically a PCR test, which tests for viral RNA. Now, this test is very sensitive, so it will pick up small numbers of viral RNA, but you still need time for the virus to replicate enough to have enough virus to be picked up by this test. So usually it takes at least 3 days for the nasal swab to come back positive if you've been exposed. Okay, so if you test right away, the chances are it's going to come back negative, even though you're infected. Okay, so it also takes a few days for the test to come back. Okay, so the lab has to pick it up, and then the lab has to run it, the lab has to get the results back, and this whole process typically takes at least a whole day to do. So you're not going to get the results back before Thanksgiving. So it's probably not worth doing the nasal swab yet. I would wait a little bit. And unfortunately, if you wait long enough to make the test more accurate, you're not going to get the test results back before Thanksgiving. So you're out of luck. And, you know, all I can say is you should have thought this through before you went on your trip just before Thanksgiving, because this was totally predictable. And, you know, I'm sorry, but I can't really help you with that. So he said, what about a rapid test? Can I do a rapid test? And the rapid tests, first of all, are not nearly as accurate as the PCR test. And the rapid test, if you're doing a blood test, is typically checking for antibodies. Okay, so antibodies take even longer to develop because first your body has to get infected with the virus, and then your body has, once your body responds to the virus by making antibodies, then it has to make enough antibodies to be detectable by the test. So the antibody test, for that to be accurate, you have to wait even longer. Okay, so now they have they have other tests now that test for viral antigens, which means it's going to test for pieces of the dead virus, and there's a rapid test available for that too. But that test is highly inaccurate, almost 50% false negatives with that test. Okay, so your best bet is to just quarantine and have somebody send you a plate to your room and quarantine for 10 to 14 days. And if you don't have any symptoms, then you can come out and rejoin your family. But unfortunately, in that scenario, that's your choice. And that's unfortunate that you'll have to spend Thanksgiving by yourself. Now, here's another case, a very similar case. Another person had went to a party with other people, and there was about 12 people having dinner together indoors in a relatively small enclosed space. They did sit about 6 feet apart, but they spent several hours together having dinner, talking, enjoying themselves, and probably some alcohol. Okay, so in this scenario, the people at the party were from different households. So the person who went to the party now wants to spend Thanksgiving with his kids. Okay, and his wife does not want the kids to go spend Thanksgiving with him because he may have been exposed at the dinner party, and the kids and the wife live with her elderly parents. So she does not want to risk having the kids go and bring the virus back to their household. So her other suggestion was that he goes, that he take the kids. And this is a very reasonable thing that you can do. If he's going to have them for Thanksgiving, then just keep the kids for 2 weeks. And then if nobody gets sick, then they can come back, because that's essentially a quarantine. But he's unable to do that. So they're in a dilemma here. If he wants to have Thanksgiving with the kids, then the kids can't really safely go back to the mother's house where the elderly grandparents are, unless they have strict isolation within the household, which may not be very feasible. So unfortunately, again, in this situation, the father is going to have to forego having Thanksgiving with the kids. Okay, so and again, with the testing, it's too soon to do the testing, and the tests are not going to be reliable. Even if the test comes back negative, does not mean that he didn't get infected. So you have to wait the 2 weeks. If you don't develop any symptoms, then you're probably okay. And at that time, you can get tested to confirm that you haven't been infected. Okay, so the next scenario is I had a friend who is a photographer and just got back from a trip, traveled on an airplane, and has to photograph a wedding. The client wants a COVID test, a negative COVID test from the photographer to make sure that she is not infected. So she came to me for a COVID test, and the wedding was like in 2 days, so she needed a rapid test. So I suggested that the rapid test is probably not going to show any type of infection because it's too soon. It's an antibody test. So we decided to do both the rapid test as well as a nasal swab to test for the PCR test, which is going to be more accurate because it had been about 3 days since the travel. Now, this is what happened. I mean, it was totally unexpected. The rapid test came back positive for both IgM and IgG. The IgM tells you if you have an active infection. After you've been infected, the IgM goes away pretty quickly. The IgG becomes positive a little bit later into the infection, and then the IgG will stick around for a while, and sometimes indefinitely. And the IgG are the antibodies that give you immunity to a virus. So in her case, her IgM and IgG were both positive, which means that presuming that the test was accurate, it means that she was recently infected because the IgM was positive, but not very recently because the IgG was also positive. So it could have been a week, it could have been 2 weeks. So with the IgG being positive, she probably was no longer infectious, but you can't really tell because the IgM was still positive, which meant that the infection was pretty recent. So we were waiting for the swab to come back, for the PCR test to come back, and it took about 3 days for the test to come back, and it finally came back the morning of the shoot of the wedding. So she was trying to scramble to find someone to substitute for her, but fortunately, the swab came back negative, which means that she was not shedding viral RNA from her nose, which meant that she was probably not infected. And this is all assuming that these test results are accurate, because remember that there are false positives and false negatives. So my thinking is that either the rapid test, which is the least accurate, was wrong, in which case it caused a lot of havoc, or that she did get infected in the past, had cleared the infection, and was now no longer infectious because she's not shedding virus from her nose. So, so she was okay. I cleared her to go and shoot the wedding because even though the rapid test was positive, the nasal swab, the PCR test, showed that she was no longer shedding virus. Okay, so here's another case, and these are all real cases that I've had just within the last couple of weeks, okay, and some within the last couple of days. So here's another person who over a month ago went to a wedding, and unfortunately, she and her husband and 5 other guests caught the coronavirus at the wedding. Her husband became very ill. She only had mild symptoms, and but her nasal swab keeps coming back positive, and this is about a month later, and the swab is still coming back positive, which puts us in a difficult situation because she's no longer symptomatic, which means that she's probably not infectious anymore. It would be great if the nasal swab was negative. Okay, so early on in the pandemic, the recommendation was if somebody was infected, they need to have 2 negative nasal swabs before being taken out of quarantine. But that presented a problem because at that time, these tests were not readily available at all. So if you couldn't get the test and you couldn't come out of quarantine and you couldn't go back to work and you have to be in isolation. So, so the recommendation had to be changed. Okay, so they did change the recommendation based on the observation that 95% of the people who get infected with coronavirus, COVID-19, will clear their nasal secretions, will have a negative test. 95% of them will have a negative test within 10 days of the onset of symptoms. Okay, so based on that, they decided, okay, you don't need to get tested. If you've been, if you're currently asymptomatic and it's been 10 days since the symptoms started, then you can go out of isolation. Okay, so so that that cleared a lot of people from having to do these tests. But here's the problem: there's 5%, so 95% of people clear it. The other 5% have persistent positive tests, and that could go on for months. And what do we do with these people? We're presuming that they're no longer infectious, but we can't say 100%. They might still be shedding low levels of virus because we know that there are people that we call long haulers that continue to have symptoms and be infectious for a prolonged period of time. So, so we're continuing to do these nasal tests weekly, hoping that this will clear quickly, so that you know, that you can be cleared to return to work. Some experts say that it's okay to go back to work, even though you're testing positive, but that but they can't be 100%. So it puts us in a very difficult situation of clearing somebody from going back to work, because then what if they are still infectious? They could potentially infect people. But none of this is 100%. So we're all taking a certain amount of risk with all of this. So finally, I wanted to mention another scenario which happened to me. I was invited to a surprise party for a friend of mine, and it was supposed to be a very small group of about 8 people, but it turned out there were a lot more than 8 people, and nobody was wearing a mask. And one of the people at the party was somebody who I know had the virus, had COVID-19 early on, and had been sick for a prolonged amount of time. And she finally recovered, but was shedding virus for months before they finally started getting negative tests, and she stopped having the symptoms. So now she believes that she's immune and no longer infectious, which could absolutely be true. But she's not wearing a mask, and she's going around wanting to hug everybody because she says that she is immune. So is that true? Is that if you've had coronavirus, if you've had COVID-19 and you recovered and you have antibodies, does that mean that you no longer need to wear masks, and that you can go about with a free pass? And that's a big question, and it's also a big problem, because I'm starting to see more and more people who've had the virus, And they do kind of have the attitude like, hey, I'm immune. I don't have to worry about this anymore. Don't worry, I can't get you sick. But I'm not so sure that's true. Okay, remember I talked about long haulers. Some of these people will have the virus and they'll keep shedding even though it's low levels. And if somebody's particularly susceptible, you can still get infected. Okay, and also you can lose your immunity. Okay, you can think that you're immune, but some people actually lose their immunity pretty quickly within a couple of months. We've seen that happening in Asia, and some people can get reinfected, and we're not sure. I mean, there's been multiple cases now of people getting it twice. Okay, so don't be so complacent if you've had it. Okay, because you can get reinfected, and also we don't know if they're getting reinfected or if they've been infected with low level of virus all along and it just kind of reactivated, kind of like the chickenpox virus. So when you get chickenpox, you recover from it and the virus goes dormant in your nerve roots, and it could stay dormant for decades, and then something will trigger it and it'll come back out in the form of shingles. Okay, and then you can become infectious again. So is COVID-19 doing the same thing, where if you're infected, it just kind of stays dormant because your immune system keeps it in check, and then if you lose your immunity or your immune system gets suppressed for whatever reason, whether you get sick or you go on steroids or something, and then it can reactivate and you can become infectious again, and without even knowing it, you can be asymptomatic and infectious. We just don't know at this point. We just don't know. So that's where we are. With people going home, people gathering with families for Thanksgiving, the best thing to do, if you're not going to limit it to your immediate family, if you're going to be exposed to other people, the best thing to do is to presume that you are infectious, okay, and be even more diligent about wearing your mask right after Thanksgiving, because they're going to guaranteed the numbers are going to go up even higher, and there's going to be a lot more people running around spewing virus out of their orifices. Okay, so when you go out in public, when you meet people, assume everybody's infected, even more so, in the weeks following Thanksgiving, and assume that you're infected. Keep your mask on and insist that the people around you keep their mask on. We know what we have to do. Okay. So if we can keep ourselves separated and protected for at least 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, we can prevent this virus from going crazy out of control. Okay. And then Christmas is right around the corner as well. So with the holidays and everything, there's a potential that this thing can spread like wildfires in California. All right. And we have the tools and we have the knowledge to prevent this from getting that out of control. It is going to get out of control. I mean, make no mistake, this virus is going to come back with a vengeance in the coming weeks. But we can mitigate that to some extent if we all do our part to keep the spread down, and then maybe we can get out of this sooner than later. Okay, so finally, I have some thoughts on how we can beat this virus once and for all. Okay, I'm not optimistic that it could really happen, but here are my thoughts on how we as the human race can get rid of this virus. Okay, now that we have some vaccines, that are going to be available. We have a couple of different companies that have shown that they have very effective vaccines that will be released very shortly. Okay, and that's great news. That's great news that we will have these vaccines. But here's the problem. The vaccines are going to be available in limited supplies in the beginning. And they're talking about giving it to essential workers or giving it to the most vulnerable populations. And then it's going to be available in some parts of the country, some parts of the world, and not in others. Okay, so what's going to happen is this is just going to go around in circles because we don't know how long the immunity from the from the vaccine will last, because we know that even from the virus, the immunity seems to go away after a while. Okay, so if we vaccinate a portion of the population and then they're immune for a while, and then we vaccinate another portion of the population and they're immune, maybe the original people who got vaccinated are no longer immune, and the virus is just going to keep passing back and forth, back and forth. And the only way that the virus survives is if the virus can jump from one human to another. Okay, if the virus cannot jump and if it stays in one host, then the virus will die, okay, because that host will mount an immune response, and that host, which is you, if you get it, your body will kill the virus in your body. And once your body can fight it, that virus is not going to continue to onto another generation. But if the virus jumps out of your body into a new host, somebody who's not been infected before, that virus will start all over again. It'll make new viruses and just start the cycle all over again. So the only lifeline for the virus is to jump from one person to another. So here's how we as a society can get out of this. Okay, with the vaccines coming, my suggestion is let's plan it. Let's as a world, as a society, plan on ambushing this virus, okay, and starving it. And this is what we do. Okay, we wait until we have enough vaccine available to vaccinate the essential workers. Okay, whether it's doctors, whether it's people who are working the grocery stores, wherever, the services that need to be done. Okay, these people are the ones who have to go out there and continue to work. They can get vaccinated. Okay, so they can do their jobs. Everybody else, and it has to be coordinated. Everybody else will need to plan for this so you can stockpile food and everything that you need. And everybody else stays home for 2 weeks, just 2 weeks, okay? If you stay home for 2 weeks and everybody does this at the same time, the virus cannot jump, okay? And the only people that it could possibly jump to are the essential workers who have been vaccinated. So if we do that, and I'm talking about doing it at the same time as a world united. Imagine first time in human history, we all do this together to fight a common enemy. We can defeat this virus in 2 weeks. Imagine that. The whole world working together, and it will take 2 weeks to rid the world of this scourge that's been just turning our lives upside down for the past 8 months or so. So I don't know if we're going to be able to pull off something like that, but that is my wish for the new year, that we can do something like that. and then we don't have to wait for years before the virus burns out on its own, and in the meantime take a lot of people and jobs and our economy with it. If we can do that, we can come out of this. Okay, so so there is hope. In the meantime, we have Thanksgiving. Okay, enjoy your Thanksgiving, and hopefully in small gatherings. And if you do get together with a larger group, just please be responsible afterwards. If you get together with a group, just assume that you're infected. Okay, and don't spread it. Just minimize your contact with other people for the next 2 weeks. Have a great Thanksgiving. God bless you, and I'll see you soon.